Ever wonder what it was like to see the pyramids before the age of selfie sticks and tour buses? Let's turn back the clock to a time when visiting Egypt was a true adventure, a journey into a land just beginning to reveal its ancient secrets to the modern world. Between 1860 and 1930, a new kind of travelers started to arrive on the banks of the Nile. These weren't armies or explorers in the old sense, but the world's first tourists. So, what did it take to be an Egyptian tourist back then? It wasn't for the faint of heart or the light of wallet. The journey itself was an epic undertaking. Most travelers would arrive by steamship to Alexandria or Port Said, a voyage that could take weeks. From there, the real adventure began. The main artery of travel was, of course, the majestic Nile River. But forget luxury cruise liners. The vessel of choice was the dahabeah, a long, elegant houseboat powered by wind and a large crew. Imagine gliding slowly down the Nile on one of these beautiful boats. The pace was unhurried, dictated by the winds and the currents. You'd spend your days on deck, watching the timeless scenes of rural Egypt drift by, farmers working their fields with ancient tools, fishermen casting their nets, and villages that had looked the same for centuries. At night, you'd moor by the riverbank, the only sounds being the gentle lapping of water and the distant calls of desert animals under a canopy of brilliant stars. It was an immersive, almost dreamlike experience. The cost of such a trip was astronomical. Hiring a dahabeah, along with its captain, crew, and a dragoman, an indispensable guide, interpreter, and travel manager all in one, was something only the very wealthy could afford. These early tourists were often European and American aristocrats, industrialists, artists, and scholars on their grand tour. They traveled with trunks full of formal wear, expecting to dine in style each evening, even in the middle of the desert. When they reached the great sites, the experience was vastly different from today. At Giza, there were no paved roads, no giant parking lots, no sound and light shows. The pyramids rose directly from the sands, silent and immense. Tourists would hire camels and local guides to explore the plateau. Climbing the Great Pyramid was a popular, albeit dangerous, activity. Men in suits and women in long, heavy dresses would be helped, pushed, and pulled up the massive stone blocks by teams of local men, all for the breathtaking view from the top and, of course, the bragging rights back home. Inside the tombs and temples, it was a world of torchlight and shadows. There was no electric lighting. Guides would lead visitors through dark passages with candles or magnesium flares, which would brilliantly, but briefly, illuminate the ancient hieroglyphs and carvings before plunging them back into darkness. This created a mysterious, almost mystical atmosphere, but the smoke and soot also caused irreversible damage to the very artworks they were revealing. Let's talk about the gear. Photography was a new and cumbersome technology. Early travel photographers had to lug around heavy wooden cameras, tripods, glass plates, and a portable dark room full of volatile chemicals. Posing for a photograph was a serious, time-consuming affair. That's why in these old photos, you rarely see anyone smiling. They had to hold perfectly still for long exposures, often in the blistering sun. These images they captured, however, were transformative. They were the first glimpses most people in the West ever had of these incredible monuments, fueling a worldwide obsession with Egyptology. Souvenir hunting was also a major part of the experience, but it was a bit of a free-for-all. The antiquities market was largely unregulated. It wasn't uncommon for tourists to buy artifacts, from small amulets and scarabs to sometimes even mummy parts, directly from locals who had found them in the sands. While this would be unthinkable and illegal today, it was a common practice that contributed to the dispersal of countless ancient treasures into private collections around the world. The social scene was another fascinating aspect. The grand hotels that sprung up in Cairo and Luxor, like the famous Shepherd's Hotel or the Winter Palace, became social hubs. After a long day of dusty exploration, tourists would change into their finest evening attire to gather on the verandas. They'd sip cocktails, exchange stories of their adventures, and mingle with fellow travelers, archaeologists, and dignitaries. It was a glamorous colonial-era bubble set against the backdrop of an ancient land. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb by Howard Carter in 1922 changed everything. The news exploded across the globe, creating an unprecedented wave of Tut mania. Suddenly, everyone wanted to go to Egypt. This event marked a turning point, shifting tourism from an elite pursuit to a more mainstream phenomenon. More hotels were built, travel infrastructure improved, and the journey became slightly more accessible, although still a major undertaking for the average person. Looking at these old photographs and reading the diaries of these early travelers, we get a sense of pure wonder. They were seeing these monuments not as polished tourist attractions, but as raw, weathered ruins rising from the sand, still half buried and full of mystery. They endured heat, dust, and discomfort for a chance to connect with a civilization that felt both impossibly ancient and incredibly alive. Their journey was a stark contrast to our own. We can now fly to Egypt in hours, see the highlights in a week, and share our photos instantly with the world. But perhaps in our efficiency, we've lost some of that slow, deliberate sense of discovery that defined their travels. They had the luxury of time, the gift of seeing these wonders before they were fully understood, and the thrill of true exploration. They were pioneers of travel, paving the way for all of us who have followed in their sandy footsteps. So next time you see a picture of the Sphinx, take a moment to imagine it not surrounded by crowds and fences, but with a lone camel and a handful of intrepid travelers in Victorian dress gazing up in silent awe. That was the dawn of tourism in Egypt, an era of grand adventure that forever changed how we see the ancient world. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this journey back in time, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories from history.